Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at Agile and Waterfall,
Ooh,
which
fun.
are two project management methodologies that
Yeah.
are very popular, and we got some great material to help us break this down.
Yeah.
We've got articles from Float, we've got Atlassian, and
Nice.
we've got the Project Management Institute.
Sounds like a party.
So our kind of mission for this deep dive is going to be to really get down and understand what each of these methodologies brings to the table,
Okay.
when you should use them, and maybe how they're adapting out there in the real world.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? You read about it in the textbook, and then you get out there and you're like, wait a minute, how do we actually apply all this stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
So this will be a good deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. I think it'll be really helpful. I think a lot of people kind of, they hear these terms,
Mm.
agile and waterfall,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't really know like what the heck is the difference.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think people use them so much that they get conflated a lot of times.
Right, right.
People think they're doing agile, but they're really doing waterfall, or they think they're doing waterfall,
Totally.
but they're accidentally doing some agile stuff.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So let's start with waterfall.
Okay.
I feel like waterfall is probably the one that most people are maybe familiar with, even if they don't really know what it is like conceptually.
Yeah, you kind of already have an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you kind of describe waterfall in like, the simplest terms?
Uh, I mean, the clue is in the name. It's all about kind of like a cascading effect.
Right.
So you have each stage of a project flows very neatly into the next one. So you can kind of think of it like a waterfall.
Okay, yeah. And so the SLOAT article that we have, it actually breaks down like the five key phases,
Okay.
which are initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, and controlling and closing.
Gotcha.
So it seems like there's like a real emphasis on that initial planning phase, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. In waterfall, you invest a lot of time up front.
Oh.
You make sure
Right.
every single detail is accounted for.
Yeah.
You assess every risk. Everybody knows exactly what their responsibilities are. And it makes it a really great approach when you have a project where all of the requirements are very well defined
Gotcha.
and they're not really likely to change much.
Okay.
So you kind of know from the get-go exactly what you need to do.
So like a good example of this would be like building a house or something.
Yeah,
Like you wouldn't just start building a house.
right.
You would have, architects and blueprints and
Exactly. You need to know where every wall is going to be, where all the plumbing and electrical is going to run, what kind of materials you're going to use.
right.
It's really all about being able to predict and control all of that,
Gotcha. Okay, so it's like the opposite of winging it.
basically.
Okay.
If you're a big wing it person, waterfall is probably not for you.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. But then, not every project is like that. Like what about those projects that are a lot less predictable?
Yeah.
Like what about those projects where maybe things are changing all the time?
Yeah.
Like that's where Agile comes in.
Yeah. Agile is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum,
Okay.
where you are going to be way more flexible and you're adapting constantly as you go.
Okay.
So think of it kind of like if you were navigating a new city without a map.
Oh, okay.
You kind of have like a general direction that you want to go,
Okay.
but you're open to, trying different routes, seeing if you discover any hidden gems, and just kind of adjusting as you go based on what you're finding.
Yeah. Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I feel like that's a lot more like how a lot of us work these days.
absolutely.
Especially, like if you're in tech or you're in some kind of creative field,
Mm-hmm.
things are just changing so fast
Right.
that you need to be able to like totally shift gears at any given moment.
Yeah.
And the Atlassian article actually, talks a lot about this, and they really emphasize those like core principles
Yeah.
of Agile,
Mm-hmm.
which are, iterative progress,
Mm-hmm.
constant feedback,
Yep.
and adapting to change. Like those are like the big three.
Yeah, that's what makes Agile so powerful. And it's all about breaking down these big projects into like smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay.
And those are called sprints. And then you're constantly getting feedback from stakeholders.
Yeah.
Seeing what's working, what's not working.
Right.
And then you're adjusting your plan based on, new information or changing priorities.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but like my brain is still trying to wrap itself around these two very different approaches.
Sure.
So do you think maybe we could like break it down a little bit further, like head to head?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, cool.
Because when you start to compare them, like that some of the differences really become clear.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
So one of the biggest differences is in how the teams are structured.
Yeah.
So waterfall tends to be a little bit more hierarchical
Okay.
with like very clearly defined roles and responsibilities.
So like think of like a traditional org chart or something.
Yes, exactly. Everybody knows their place in the chain of command.
Okay.
But agile teams are very different.
Okay.
Agile teams tend to be a lot more collaborative,
Mm-hmm.
and they're self-organizing.
Okay.
So everybody has a voice and decisions are made collectively,
Oh, interesting.
which allows for a lot more flexibility and much faster decision making.
Okay. I can
Yeah.
see how that would be really appealing
Mhm.
to like someone who, values autonomy
Right.
or, being able to like really contribute their ideas and stuff.
Totally.
But wouldn't that also be kind of chaotic? Like if everybody's just like doing their own thing?
Yeah, and that's where I think it's so important to have a shared vision
Okay.
and to make sure that the communication is super clear.
Right.
So agile teams may be self-organizing, but they're still all working toward that common goal.
Okay.
The difference is that they have the freedom to adapt how they're going to reach that goal.
Gotcha. So it's not like you're totally throwing structure out the window.
Right.
It's just that you're finding a different kind of structure.
Yeah, you're finding a structure that allows for flexibility and responsiveness.
Okay. Okay, that's a good distinction, I think.
Yeah,
So another big difference, I think, is how planning is approached,
for sure.
right? So waterfall, it's all about that upfront detailed planning.
Yeah, you basically create like a super detailed blueprint
Okay.
of the entire project before you even start doing anything.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If the requirements are really clear and you want to like minimize risk as
Mhm.
much as possible,
Right.
but what happens if those requirements change
Yeah.
like midway through the project? Does the whole thing just like fall apart?
It can definitely cause some major delays and frustrations.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, but Agile, on the other hand, embraces this idea of continuous planning.
Okay.
So you plan throughout the entire life cycle of the project.
Right.
So you do still create a high-level plan at the beginning,
Okay.
but you're constantly refining it and adjusting it as you go.
Okay. So it kind of ties back to that idea of the iterative cycles.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're constantly checking in,
Yeah.
making adjustments, and making sure that you're still on track.
Exactly. And that's what makes Agile so adaptable to those changing requirements.
Right.
It lets teams respond to new information, incorporate feedback,
Mm-hmm.
pivot when they need to without completely derailing the entire project.
So it's like Agile just embraces uncertainty instead of trying to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Agile acknowledges that change is gonna happen, especially in the world that we live in now,
Right.
and it just provides that framework for navigating that change in an effective way.
Yeah. Okay. This is really eye-opening.
Good.
I'm definitely seeing how these two approaches would be more suitable for different types of projects.
Yeah.
You know.
They both have their place.
But before we move on to talking about when to use each one,
Sure.
I think it's important to address something that I've heard people say about Agile, which is that, you don't need any documentation or planning at all,
Right.
which kind of sounds a little bit chaotic to me.
Yeah, no, that's a really common misconception.
Okay.
Agile doesn't mean no documentation or planning.
Okay.
It just means that you prioritize the right kind of documentation and the right kind of planning.
Okay. I like the right kind. So what is the right kind?
Well, for example, with documentation, Agile teams still document their work,
Oh.
but they focus on creating just enough documentation
Okay.
to facilitate communication and understanding.
Gotcha.
So instead of creating like super lengthy specifications,
Mhm.
they might use user stories, visual diagrams,
Okay.
or even just quick notes that are captured during their daily stand-up meetings.
Okay. So it's more about like capturing the essence of what they're doing
Right.
and keeping everyone on the same page
Exactly.
than like getting bogged down in a bunch of paperwork.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Right, for sure. And then what about planning? Like how does planning work in an Agile environment?
So Agile teams emphasize short-term planning.
Okay.
So instead of trying to plan out like everything up front,
Mhm.
you just focus on planning for the next sprint, which is usually like 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, that seems way more manageable,
Right.
especially if things are changing all the time. Like you're not trying to predict the future 6 months out.
Right.
You're just focused on what you can do in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And then if something changes, you can always adjust your plan for the next sprint
Right.
without totally messing everything up.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense now. Like
Yeah.
I can see how Agile works in practice,
Good.
but I am curious about how do you measure progress?
Yeah.
Like how do you keep people accountable in an environment that's so fluid
Yeah, that's a great question.
and adaptable like that?
Yeah, and it leads us to another key difference between Agile and Waterfall.
Ooh, okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it.
Okay, so Agile teams typically track their progress,
Okay.
and they stay accountable using a combination of visual tools, frequent communication, and demonstrable outputs.
Okay, break that down for me. What do you mean by visual tools?
So think like Kanban boards, burn down charts,
Okay.
or even just like sticky notes on a whiteboard.
Okay.
So they make the work visible, and it makes it easy for everybody to see, what's been done,
Yeah.
what's in progress, what's coming up next.
So it's like you're creating that shared understanding
It's
of
the
these
team's
things.
progress.
And that transparency helps to foster accountability because everybody can see who's working on what and how all of the individual pieces fit together.
Okay. That's a really cool way to like build in that accountability without having to like be super like over people's shoulders all the time.
Exactly.
Okay. And then what about the frequent communication? Like, what does that look like?
So Agile teams usually have daily stand-up meetings where every team member will share just like a super quick update on what they did yesterday, what they're working on today, and if they're facing any roadblocks. So it's like a daily pulse check.
Pretty much, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and address any issues that might pop up.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And then on top of the daily stand-ups,
Right.
they also have like regular sprint reviews and retrospectives.
Exactly. So the sprint review is where they'll showcase all of the work that was done during the sprint.
Okay.
They'll gather feedback from stakeholders and make sure that the project is meeting those objectives.
Okay.
And then retrospectives.
Yeah.
That's where the team can reflect on what went well,
Gotcha.
what could have been improved,
Right.
and how to make the next sprint even better.
So there's like a real emphasis on continuous improvement.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about getting the work done. It's about getting better as you do it.
Yeah, I love that. And that's actually a big difference between Agile and Waterfall,
Right.
right? Like Waterfall, it's kind of like you just follow the plan and that's it.
Yeah, and then hopefully everything turns out how it's supposed to.
Yeah. Cross your fingers.
Whereas Agile, you're constantly iterating and learning and improving.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I feel like we've really kind of broken down some of those core differences between these two.
Yeah.
Especially in terms of like how the teams work, the planning, the documentation,
Right.
and even how you measure progress. But before we move on to like when to use each one,
Yeah.
I am really curious about those demonstrable outputs that you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
How do Agile teams actually prove that they're delivering value,
Yeah.
especially in those like short sprint cycles?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to Agile's focus on delivering value in increments.
Okay.
So at the end of each sprint, an Agile team should be able to deliver something called a potentially shippable product increment,
Okay.
which means it's like a piece of working functionality that could actually be released to users if they wanted to.
Okay. So it's not just like checking boxes off on a list.
Right.
It's like creating something tangible
Yeah.
and usable that shows real progress.
Exactly. And these demonstrable outputs could be, a new feature in a software application. It could be like a working prototype of a physical product,
Okay.
or even a completed marketing campaign that's ready to launch.
So people can actually see it
Right.
and touch it and interact with it.
Exactly. It's not just talk. It's like you can actually experience the progress.
Yeah. And I bet that's super motivating for the team
Absolutely.
and for like the stakeholders involved.
It helps to build trust and, it keeps everybody focused on delivering value.
Okay. This is awesome. We've really like unpacked a lot
Yeah, we have.
about Agile and Waterfall
We've gone deep.
and those key differences between them.
Yeah.
But I think our listeners are probably ready to hear about when to use each one.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So let's move on to that. Like,
Yeah.
which one is best for which type of project or situation?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Let's start by talking about when Waterfall really shines.
Okay, perfect. Lead the way.
Okay. So we were just about to talk about when each method really is the right tool for the job.
Right, because, I mean, like we've seen, they both have their strengths, but they're definitely not one size fits all.
Right. You got to pick the right tool for the right project.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start with Waterfall.
Okay.
Waterfall really thrives when you've got really clear project requirements
Okay.
and a really well-defined path to the finish line.
So kind of going back to that house building example,
Mhm.
that seems like a classic waterfall situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Construction projects are a really great example of where waterfall works really well.
Okay.
Because you've got those really detailed blueprints. You've usually got a fixed budget and a predetermined timeline.
Right. You know exactly what you're building and you know how long it's going to take.
Exactly.
And how much it's going to cost.
Yeah. And in those situations where you have all that upfront planning and structure, that can really help to minimize risks and keep everything on track.
Right. Like you wouldn't want to start building this second floor before you've laid the foundation.
Exactly. Waterfall provides that step-by-step approach, which is so essential when each stage depends on the one before it.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other industries or types of projects that really lend themselves to that waterfall method?
Yeah, definitely. Manufacturing is a great example.
Okay.
Think of like an assembly line.
Okay.
You know, where they're putting together a car or something.
Right.
Each step has to happen in a specific sequence.
Yeah.
If you deviate from that sequence, the whole system can get thrown off.
So that consistency and control to make sure that everything's efficient and high quality.
Exactly. And then another area where waterfall's really good is for projects that have really strict regulatory requirements.
Oh, okay.
So think of industries like pharmaceuticals or aerospace, where safety and compliance are super important.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So all that documentation and process would be crucial in those situations.
Yeah, you really got to be able to trace every step.
Right.
Document every decision, make sure that you're meeting every single requirement.
So waterfall is still super relevant, especially when you need that predictability and that structure.
It definitely has its place.
Yeah. But what about Agile? When does Agile really shine?
So Agile is like the opposite end of the spectrum, like we talked about. It's a really good fit for projects where the requirements are likely to change.
Okay.
Where you need a ton of flexibility and you need to get something into the hands of users as quickly as possible to get feedback.
Okay. So things like software development, creative projects, or anything that's kind of constantly evolving.
Exactly. Like imagine you're developing a new mobile app.
Okay.
The technology's changing so fast.
Right.
User expectations are always evolving.
Yeah, you got to keep up.
Yeah, Agile gives you that structure to iterate really rapidly, get constant feedback, and then respond to those changes effectively.
So instead of spending months or years trying to develop this like perfect product, you're getting something out there quickly.
Yeah.
You're gathering feedback, and then you're improving it along the way.
Exactly. It's all about validating your assumptions.
Okay.
Testing your ideas and making sure that you're building something that people actually want.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I bet that's a lot less risky too.
Oh, definitely.
Than spending like, tons of time and money on something that people might not even like.
Yeah, you're constantly getting that feedback and incorporating it into your process.
And with Agile, everybody's empowered to contribute their ideas and really make an impact.
Right.
Which I bet leads to more innovation and creativity.
Oh, for sure. And that's a big part of why Agile has become so popular. It's not just a methodology. It's almost like a philosophy about how to work better together.
Okay. Yeah. I can see why people describe it as like a cultural shift.
Yeah.
Not just like a process change. But I'm curious, are there ever situations where you might want to like blend the two?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of organizations are realizing that they don't have to pick one or the other.
Oh, okay.
You can actually take the best parts of both.
Okay.
And create what's called like a hybrid approach.
Oh, interesting. So like you're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
Right. You get the structure and predictability of waterfall combined with the flexibility and responsiveness of Agile.
But how does that even work? Those two seem so different.
Yeah, they are different, but they can also be complementary.
Okay.
So, for example, you could use waterfall for that initial planning phase.
Okay.
Especially if you have a fixed budget or like regulatory requirements.
Right.
Where you need a lot of upfront planning.
So you're laying the foundation with waterfall.
Exactly.
Making sure everybody's on the same page. And then you switch to Agile for the actual execution of the project.
Yeah. Okay.
So once you've got that framework in place, then you can break it down into smaller pieces.
Okay. And use those Agile principles to iterate and get feedback.
Okay, so it's like a hybrid model.
Exactly.
That takes the best of each method.
Right. And that's really common in certain industries like finance.
Oh, okay.
Where you often have really strict regulations.
Right. So waterfall makes sense for that initial phase.
Exactly. But then you need to be able to adapt quickly to changing market conditions and customer needs and new technology.
So that's where Agile comes in.
Right.
You can test new features, get feedback, and really refine the product based on how people are using it.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between control and compliance.
Okay.
And speed and innovation.
Wow. This is really fascinating. I love how these two things that seem so different can actually work together.
It's all about picking and choosing what works best for your specific project and your organization.
It's not about just following the rules. It's about understanding the principles.
Exactly.
And adapting them to fit your needs.
And that's what makes project management so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
I'm really starting to rethink my whole approach to project management.
Good. I'm glad.
It's not about picking a side.
Right.
It's about finding that right balance.
Yeah.
And making it work for you.
And I think that goes back to that idea of Agile being a cultural shift.
Right. Tell me more about that. What does that cultural shift look like?
Well, it has to start with buy-in from leadership.
Okay.
If the leaders aren't on board, it's not going to work.
Makes sense.
It's about creating a culture where people feel safe to experiment and to fail fast and learn from their mistakes.
So it's like fostering that psychological safety.
Exactly.
Where people aren't afraid to try new things.
Right. And it's also about encouraging collaboration between different departments.
Right. Breaking down those silos.
Exactly. Because Agile teams usually have people from all different disciplines.
Okay.
And they're all working together closely.
So instead of having separate teams for design and development and testing,
right,
you have one team that's responsible for the whole thing.
Exactly. And that helps to make sure that everybody's communicating effectively, making decisions quickly, and they really understand the customer's needs.
Okay, but I bet that shift can be really challenging for some organizations.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially if they're used to that more traditional top-down approach.
It can be a huge change to shift an entire organization's culture.
Yeah, you can't just flip a switch and make it happen.
No, it takes time and commitment.
Right, and patience.
Yeah, and a willingness to adapt as you go.
This is awesome. We've learned so much.
We have.
We've talked about waterfall. We've talked about agile.
Yeah.
We've talked about hybrid approaches.
We've gone deep.
But I think before we wrap up, I do want to touch on the potential downsides of agile.
Sure.
Because I feel like we've talked about a lot of the benefits.
Yeah.
But there's always two sides to every coin. So what are some of the pitfalls that organizations should be aware of?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a perfect way to transition to the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore some of those downsides and then wrap everything up.
Okay. Awesome. Can't wait. Welcome back to the show. So before the break, we were talking about all the amazing things about Agile.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
But we got to talk about the other side of that coin too, right?
Right, because like any methodology, Agile is not perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it's not applied correctly, it can definitely lead to some problems.
Okay, so what are some of the things that people should watch out for when they're thinking about adopting Agile?
Well, one of the biggest pitfalls is this idea that Agile is like a magic bullet.
Right, like it's going to solve all your problems.
Exactly. And some organizations will just try to like force fit Agile into everything they do without really understanding the principles behind it or thinking about whether it's actually a good fit.
Yeah, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important to carefully consider how you're going to implement it.
Wow.
Because Agile is really a mindset.
Okay.
It's a way of thinking about work. It's not just a set of tools and processes.
So you can't just like check the boxes and call it a day.
Right. You got to really embrace the philosophy behind it.
Okay, that makes sense. What else? What are some other potential downsides?
Another thing to watch out for is that sometimes when teams transition to Agile, they can lose some of the discipline and structure.
Oh, okay. How does that happen?
Well, because Agile is all about being flexible and self-organizing, right?
Right.
Sometimes that can lead to a lack of accountability.
Oh, okay.
Where, you know, people start to kind of stray from the original goals of the project.
So it's like you're giving people all this freedom, but then they don't know what to do with it.
Right. It's like they set off on a road trip without a map.
Yeah, and then they just end up driving in circles.
Exactly. So it's important to strike that balance between flexibility and discipline. Agile doesn't mean you just throw all the rules out the window.
Right. You still need some kind of guidelines.
Exactly. It's about finding that right level of structure to keep the team on track.
Gotcha. And then what about when you're trying to scale Agile?
Yeah, scaling Agile can definitely be tricky.
Okay.
One challenge is that you might have different teams or different departments that aren't all on the same page.
Oh, okay.
So like some teams might be fully embracing Agile.
Yeah.
And then other teams are still stuck in that waterfall mindset.
Right.
And that can lead to a lot of friction and miscommunication.
Yeah, it's like having different parts of a machine that aren't working together properly.
Right, and it can really slow down the whole
Yeah.
process.
Wow. Do you avoid that?
Well, it's really important to make sure that everybody understands the shared goals
Okay.
and the principles behind Agile.
So lots of communication.
Yeah, you might need to do some cross-functional training.
Okay.
Really break down those silos between departments.
So everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Exactly. And then another challenge with scaling Agile is that it can sometimes lead to more complexity.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, as more and more teams adopt Agile,
Mm-hmm.
it can become harder to manage all those dependencies
Right.
and to track progress across multiple teams.
Yeah, and to keep everybody focused on the big picture.
Exactly. So you might need to invest in new tools or technologies,
Okay.
or even change the way your organization is structured.
So it sounds like Agile can be a really powerful tool,
Yeah,
but it's not a quick fix.
right.
It takes a lot of planning and commitment.
And patience.
Yeah.
But the potential rewards are huge.
Okay, so what are those rewards? Like, what can organizations achieve if they implement Agile effectively?
Well, they can definitely become a lot faster.
Yeah.
Their teams will collaborate better.
Hmm.
They'll be more focused on their customers.
Okay.
And they'll have a more engaged and empowered workforce.
So it's not just about getting projects done faster.
Right.
It's about creating a better work environment overall.
Exactly. And it's also about building that culture of continuous learning and innovation.
Wow, this has been such a great deep dive.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We've gone from the basics of Agile and Waterfall to real-world examples,
Yeah.
hybrid approaches.
We even talked about the challenges of scaling Agile.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that project management isn't about blindly following any one methodology.
Yeah, you got to find what works best for you.
Exactly. It's about understanding those underlying principles and adapting them to fit your specific needs.
And never stop learning and experimenting.
That's such a great point. The world of project management is constantly changing.
Yeah.
So we always have to be ready to adapt and evolve.
And that's what keeps it interesting.
I totally agree. This has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And for all of you listening out there, keep those knowledge-seeking brains engaged until next time.